Hi, I'm Ron Paulk, home builder and finish carpenter. And today I'm going to take a couple of minutes to show you a couple of measuring techniques I've used for quite a few years that's helped me to be much more efficient when I'm installing base molding. It takes a couple of basic tools, obviously a tape measure, a pencil, and a pad. Those are the primary tools to get the job done. My measuring technique is most efficient because I do all of my measuring at one time. And then I go do my cutting all at one time, and then I do my installing all at one time. I find that if I measure, I'm in rhythm, I'm in sync with doing that, and then when I get to the saw and start cutting, I've got all the right tools out and I'm in sync with that, and then installing again, a different set of tools. If I do a bit of measuring and a bit of cutting and a bit of installing, I'm having to transition, and that transition takes time. Even if it's just a few minutes, it's a few minutes that's wasted. So when I say that I do all of my measuring, I mean that quite literally. I can come into a house, whether it's 1,000 feet or 7,000 feet like this one. I'll measure the entire house first, and then I'll go back to the saw and cut the entire house, and then I'll go back and install the entire house. The one breakup in that is when I'm at the saw cutting, each room that I cut, I will then bring that material back to that room and store it there or put it there to be installed, and then go back to the saw and cut the next room. So these pads that I use are a pretty important tool in my workflow. They're made of vinyl. I don't buy these, I get these. They're scraps from jobs, and it's basically a cheap vinyl. It's the paperback stuff that you can write on. I can take the scrap they give me, I cut up this size pad, which fits. A whole bunch of them fit perfectly in my bag, and I use one pad for one room. So I'll write down master bedroom, and then I'll measure that entire room, and then I'll put it in my pocket and get another one out and go to the next room. And then when I get to my saw, what's really nice about these is I take a piece of duct tape, turn it inside out, make a little loop, and then I will just stick it on the saw so it's right in front of my eyes, right on top of the saw, and then I start cutting. I don't cut top to bottom, I cut long to short to be more efficient with the material, and it also happens to be a little quicker because I'm working with longer and down to shorter. So I'll mark off as I cut a piece, I'll make the cuts, and then I'll mark it off, and then I'll go make the next shortest piece and mark it and just go down. When I'm done, I just toss the pad in the garbage, and I take the material, move it to the room that it was for, and then I go back to the saw with the next pad and cut that room. And so again, it's a rhythm of measuring, being in that mindset, having those tools out, then cutting, being in that mindset, having those tools out, and then installing. So that's a big part of the technique. Now in the measuring, measuring by myself is pretty critical. It doesn't make any sense at all to have two carpenters measuring. And so that takes a few tools. When you're running base molding or crown molding, you're going to find yourself measuring longer distances, and you're going to find that your base material is 16 feet, and sometimes you have to do multiple pieces to do runs. And so even if you're measuring over 8 or 9 feet and trying to use a tape measure, you're going to find that that causes more inaccuracy, more grief than other methods. And so I'll certainly use, I have a good tape, a 1-inch wide rule, but once I'm starting to push it out there and I'm starting to get bend on it, then it's time to have a little assistance. And now what I do and what I have done is I just use a chunk of solid wood. This is, it's pretty rigid. I wouldn't use MDF because it would be too flexible, but just a chunk of fir or even a 1x2 piece of cedar is great. And I cut it to exactly 120 inches, 10 feet. And the reason I do that is I'm always adding this dimension to another dimension, and so it's a nice even number, and it's also a good reach. It brings me back from a corner 10 feet. Take the measuring stick, put it in the corner about where the top's going to be, make a mark, and I'll be doing this near where the top's going to be, so any marks I make are going to be hidden behind the base molding. And then all I need to do is take the tape measure, butt it into the corner, and measure back, and just add that dimension to 10 feet. Right there, right where I'm at, I write that total dimension down, and I also have a shorthand that I use to what the cut is on the right and what the cut is on the left. And so I'll write down the cut on the right and the cut on the left with the dimension in the middle. So if it's 121 and 5/16, I'll have that in the middle, and then I'll have on the right side I'll have my shorthand. B is for a butt cut, and this side say would be a coat. And so when I go back to my saw, I know the right cut and the left cut. When I stick this on my saw, I don't need to think at all. All I need to do is know that the right side is going to be just a straight butt cut, and I know the overall dimension is 121 and 5/16, and then I pull that measurement, and then I'll cut my cope on the other side. There's just really no way for me to get confused using this method. So again, I'm at the wall, and it's as if I brought my miter saw and stand into that wall, and I'm facing it. I don't have to visualize the room when I'm back at the saw. All I need to do is look at the pad. Now the measuring stick I've used for a long time, and it served me well, and nothing wrong with going with that method. But with new technology, there are some easier, faster ways even. A few years ago, I picked up a laser measuring tape from Stabila. Back when I got this, they were fairly new on the market, and they were pretty expensive. They were around $300. These days, I think they're half that price, or even less. And there's other brands as well. But I knew that I wanted it to be durable, and I wanted it to be very, very accurate. So with this, whether I'm doing crown molding or base, it's really simple to come into the room, butt it into the corner. I can see the dot on the other end, and I'll push the button 3 times, and I'm down here with my pad, and I look at all 3 dimensions, and as long as they're all the same, I know that it's accurate, and I'll write down that dimension and my right cut and my left cut, and then I can just turn around and go to the next. And again, I'm facing the wall. I've got my dimension right here in front of me. I can write it down, and then my cut on the right and my cut on the left, and then move to the next. And so by having just a simple technique of facing the wall, having your measuring technique, whether it's a sophisticated laser tape, or whether you're using a measuring tape and a measuring stick, you can be just as accurate. You'll just be a little bit faster with the laser tape. And now it's time to go to the saw and start making the cuts. And this is where the efficiency, the workflow techniques continue. Whatever miter saw stand you have, it's been my experience, the most important thing when you're a finished carpenter is that the material, the crown, the base, the casing, whatever you're cutting, fits in front of you, between you and the saw. It's the only place you can put it that you can efficiently stay in front of the saw and cut. By having the material beneath you, when you're cutting, you're able to reach down, pull the material up, put it in position, and make your cut, and then take your final piece and set it aside to be taken to where it's going to be installed, and then continue cutting. Anywhere else, if you have it behind you on a table or on sawhorses, you have to turn around and you have to either bring it over your head or bring it around. But by having it between you and the saw and having it facing in the right direction, you don't want to have it so that if you need to cut it this side up, that you have to spin it around. So when you load your miter stand, you want to load it in the position that it's the most efficient movement of moving it up and onto the saw, whether you're cutting it flat or whether you're cutting it in position. And then you'll have all of your stack of pads that are all labeled for each room, and it doesn't really matter which room you start with. I tend to, if I have big great rooms or grand rooms that have long pieces that are put together to go on walls that are over 16, or rooms that just have a lot of long pieces, I'll tend to start with those just so that I'm efficient with my use of material. If I cut long to short, I'm always going to have better use of material. But anyhow, I have my stack of my whole house measured and ready to cut. And then I'll just take a piece of duct tape roll it onto itself so sticky side is out, and I'll stick this right on the saw there, and then after I make my cut, I'm able to mark off, make the next cut on both ends, and mark off. And when I'm done with that pad, I can throw it away. I know that room is cut, and then I'll pick up all of that stack of material that's for that room, and I'll move it to the room that it's going to be installed and just put it in the middle of the floor, so that later on when I set up with my air hose and my nail gun and glue and the things that I'm going to have, I'll have my bags loaded up with that stuff. I'll move into that room and I'll start installing it. And I'll always start my first install, or my first piece in that room will be the exact same way that I measured it, going counterclockwise, because I'll have cut my butt cuts and my cope cuts and my outside miters, and everything will just work around the room. So you still need to develop your skills on coping and cutting scarf joints and cutting miters and fitting joints together and gluing and how you nail and finding the studs to nail onto. And all of those things, those skills are still required. But adding a bit of workflow, a bit of efficiency will take you to the next level. It actually will improve your techniques and your actual fitting skills, because you won't be rushed, you won't be hurrying up. Your speed will be in your efficiency and the fact that you're measuring all at once and you're cutting all at once and you're installing all at once. And you will have to go back to the saw here and there. When you measure a whole house, in the beginning you'll find that you go back to the saw a certain number of cuts to make a refinement. But as you do it more and more, you will go back to the saw less and less. I don't think you'll ever measure, cut, install a house without having to do some recutting, but you'll find that it'll become less and less times that you have to return to the saw. If you want your boss to pay you more money, then produce more, but keep the quality of workmanship up. If you want to be able to make more from your clients, you've got a competitive world out there. It's difficult to charge more for hanging and casing a door than others are charging. But if you can hang and case 5 or 6 doors when the other guy hangs or cases 3 doors, you've increased your income just by being more efficient. If just measuring properly and getting a rhythm and doing one thing over and over, if you can take those techniques, apply them, you'll find that they work in everything. When you're hanging doors, go through the house and hang all of the doors. And then when you're casing the doors, you go through and you measure all the doors, and then you case all the doors. Windows the same way. And then when it's crown molding and base, you're just doing one thing over and over until it's done. And you'll find that that efficiency, the time that you take to develop those efficiency skills, will more than pay for themselves in a very, very short period of time.